The autumn evening wrapped around Maya Thompson like a cool blanket as she walked home from debate practice. At 17, she was already making plans for law school, carrying her heavy backpack filled with research materials and legal texts. The streetlights had just started to flicker on, casting long shadows across the suburban sidewalks of Cedar Heights. Maya checked her phone. 6:45 p.m. Her father, Captain David Thompson, would still be at the police station, probably finishing up his paperwork for the day. She smiled, thinking about how he always told her to text him when she was heading home, even though their house was just 15 minutes from school. As she turned onto Maple Street, she noticed a police cruiser slowly rolling alongside her. At first, she didn't worry. Growing up as a police captain's daughter had taught her that police presence was normal in their neighborhood. But something felt different this time. The cruiser's pace matched her walking speed exactly, and she could feel eyes watching her every move. "Hey, you there! Stop walking!" A voice called out from the cruiser. Officer James Morrison stepped out, adjusting his belt with an air of authority that made Maya's stomach twist. She knew her rights. Her father had taught her well, but she also knew the reality of being a young black woman alone on a dark street. "Good evening, officer," Maya said clearly, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. She stood under a streetlight, making sure she was visible. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Always stay where cameras or witnesses can see you." Officer Morrison approached her, his hand resting casually on his weapon. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a thick mustache and a small scar above his right eyebrow. Maya made mental notes of every detail, just as her father had taught her. Badge number 6847, name tag clearly visible. Body camera light wasn't on. "What are you doing out here at this time?" Morrison asked, his tone suggesting she was somewhere she shouldn't be. "I'm walking home from debate practice at Cedar Heights High School," Maya replied, pointing to her school ID card hanging around her neck. "I live just 3 blocks away." Morrison circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "We've had reports of drug activity in this area. I'm going to need to do a quick search." Maya's heart pounded harder. "Sir, I don't consent to a search. I'm a minor, and I'd like to call my father." Morrison ignored her request. "Arms out, feet apart," he ordered, moving closer. "This is standard procedure." Maya felt her throat tighten as Morrison's hands moved across her body. This wasn't procedure. She knew that much from growing up around police officers. His touch lingered too long, went places it shouldn't. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced herself to stay focused. Remember the details. Remember everything. The search lasted only minutes, but to Maya, it felt like hours. Morrison's hands finally withdrew, and he stepped back with a smirk. "Everything seems clear here. You can go now." Maya didn't run, though every fiber of her being wanted to. Instead, she walked at a measured pace, her legs shaking beneath her. She memorized more details: the cruiser number, the time on the bank's digital display across the street, the security cameras outside Mrs. Johnson's house that might have captured everything. Once she turned the corner onto her street, Maya broke into a run. She burst through her front door, locking it behind her, and slid down to the floor. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone, barely able to see the screen through her tears. She didn't call 911. She called her father directly. "Daddy," she whispered when he answered, her voice breaking. "Something bad happened. Officer 6847, he stopped me on Maple Street." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Captain Thompson spoke, his voice was tight with controlled fury. "Baby girl, are you home?" "Yes." "Lock all the doors. I'm coming home right now. Don't shower, don't change your clothes. We're going to handle this the right way." As Maya hung up the phone, she could already hear her father barking orders to someone at the station. She hugged her knees to her chest, her father's badge number pin still attached to her backpack catching the light. The same badge that was meant to protect people. The same badge that Officer Morrison had just betrayed. The weight of what happened, and what was about to happen, settled over Maya like a heavy cloud. In just a few minutes, her father would arrive, and the story would truly begin to unfold. Captain David Thompson's police cruiser screeched to a halt in front of their 2-story house just 12 minutes after Maya's call. He had broken several speed limits getting home, but right now, he didn't care about that. His hands were shaking as he unlocked the front door, finding Maya exactly where she had said she would be, curled up on the living room couch, still in her school clothes. "Baby girl," he said softly, his anger momentarily replaced by concern. Maya looked up, her eyes red from crying, and suddenly she was running into his arms just like she used to do when she was little. But this wasn't a scraped knee or a broken toy. This was something far worse. "Tell me everything," Captain Thompson said, sitting down beside her. He pulled out his personal phone to record her statement, trying to be both a father and a police officer at the same time. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. Maya's voice trembled as she described every detail. Badge number 6847, Officer Morrison. He had a scar above his right eyebrow. The time was 6:45 p.m. He didn't have his body camera on, Daddy. I checked because you always told me to look for that. As Maya continued speaking, Captain Thompson's jaw clenched tighter and tighter. He recognized the name immediately. James Morrison had been on the force for 8 years, and there had been whispers about him before. Nothing that stuck, but enough to make Thompson uneasy. "Mrs. Johnson's security cameras might have caught it," Maya added, wiping her eyes. "And the bank's cameras across the street. I remembered what you taught me about always noting possible evidence." Pride mixed with pain in Captain Thompson's chest. His daughter had done everything right, had been so brave, but she shouldn't have had to be. He shouldn't have had to teach his 17-year-old daughter how to document police misconduct. "I need to make some calls," he said, standing up. "But first, we're going to the hospital for a medical examination. We need to document everything properly." Maya nodded, understanding the importance of procedure. As she went upstairs to get her jacket, Captain Thompson stepped into his home office and closed the door. His hands were steady now as he dialed Chief Roberts' number. "Sir, we have a situation," he said when the chief answered. "One of our officers assaulted my daughter tonight during an illegal stop and search." His voice was controlled, professional, even as rage burned in his chest. "Badge 6847, James Morrison." There was a long pause on the other end. "David," Chief Roberts finally said, "are you sure you want to do this? You know how these things can get." "With all due respect, sir," Captain Thompson cut in, "if you're about to suggest covering this up, I want it on record that I will go to every newspaper in this state. This ends now." The chief was silent for another moment. "I'll call Internal Affairs immediately. They'll need her statement tonight." "We're going to the hospital first," Thompson replied. "And Chief? I want Morrison's badge. Not next week, not after an investigation, tonight." As he hung up the phone, Captain Thompson heard footsteps in the hallway. Maya stood in the doorway, her debate team jacket zipped up to her chin like armor. "Is this going to be bad, Dad?" she asked quietly. "I know how officers treat other officers who report them." Captain Thompson walked over and hugged his daughter tightly. "Listen to me, Maya. What's going to happen next isn't going to be easy. Some people will try to protect him, others will try to discredit you. But I promise you this, he will never wear that badge again, and he will never hurt another person like he hurt you." Maya nodded against his chest, drawing strength from her father's determination. Together, they walked out to the car, both knowing that their lives were about to change dramatically. Captain Thompson started the engine, his mind already mapping out the battles ahead, the department politics, the potential backlash, the long legal process. But as he looked at his daughter sitting beside him, her head held high despite everything, he knew this was a fight worth having. It wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about every person who had ever been afraid to speak up, every victim who had been silenced by a badge. The night was just beginning, and with it, the long journey toward justice. The Internal Affairs Office was cold and uninviting at 9:30 p.m. Detective Sarah Chen sat across from Maya and Captain Thompson, her face showing no emotion as she reviewed the hospital report. 20 years in internal affairs had taught her to keep her feelings hidden, but even she felt sick reading the nurse's documentation of bruising. "Let's go through this one more time," Detective Chen said, pressing the record button on her device. "Maya, tell me exactly what happened on Maple Street." As Maya repeated her story for the third time that night, Detective Chen watched Captain Thompson from the corner of her eye. The captain sat perfectly still, his face a mask of professional calm, but his hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had turned white. Officer Morrison has been placed on immediate administrative leave. Detective Chen informed them, sliding a folder across her desk. But there's something else you both need to see. Inside the folder were 5 previous complaints against Officer Morrison, all from young women of color, all filed within the last 3 years. All had been dismissed due to lack of evidence or insufficient cause. Captain Thompson's jaw tightened as he read each report. Why wasn't I informed about these? He works in my precinct. The complaints were handled by Lieutenant Garcia, Detective Chen explained, referring to Morrison's direct supervisor. He deemed them not serious enough for higher review. Maya leaned forward, her voice stronger than it had been all night. Those other girls, could we contact them? Detective Chen nodded slowly. Usually, we keep complainant information confidential, but if they're willing to come forward. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Having multiple victims testify would make our case much stronger. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Officer Peterson, a young internal affairs investigator, entered with a USB drive in his hand. Detective Chen, we got the security footage from Mrs. Johnson's house and the bank. You need to see this. They gathered around Detective Chen's computer screen. The footage was clear. Morrison's patrol car following Maya, the illegal stop, the inappropriate search. Everything was captured from 2 different angles. That's enough, Captain Thompson said sharply when the video showed Morrison's hands moving where they shouldn't. We have what we need. Detective Chen turned off the video and faced them. Captain, you know how these cases usually go. Officers protect their own. Lieutenant Garcia is already trying to claim this was a standard stop and frisk. Not this time, Captain Thompson replied, his voice firm. I want a full investigation. Check his body camera logs for the past year. Review every complaint. Interview every female suspect he's detained. No stone unturned. Maya, who had been quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. What about the other girls? The ones who filed complaints before? They must have felt so alone when nobody believed them. The room fell silent. Detective Chen looked at Maya with newfound respect. Even after everything she'd been through, this young woman was thinking about others. I'll contact them personally, Detective Chen promised. But Maya, you should know, coming forward like this, standing up to a police officer, it's incredibly brave. And having this evidence, plus your father's position, means Morrison won't be able to escape accountability this time. Captain Thompson put his arm around Maya's shoulders. We're not just filing a complaint. We're pressing criminal charges. Detective Chen nodded, already pulling out more forms. Sexual assault, abuse of power, civil rights violations, the list is long. But Captain, you know there will be pushback. Some officers won't like one of their own being prosecuted. Let them push back, Captain Thompson said. It's time for things to change. As they left the Internal Affairs office that night, Maya noticed her father looked older, more tired than she'd ever seen him. But there was also determination in his eyes. Dad, she said as they walked to the car, what happens now? Captain Thompson looked at his daughter, seeing not just his little girl anymore, but a strong young woman who was fighting for justice. Now, we make sure this never happens to anyone else. It won't be easy. Some people at the department won't like it. They'll try to protect Morrison, try to discourage us. But we're going to see this through. Maya nodded, standing a little straighter. The fear from earlier was still there, but something else was growing stronger. A determination to fight not just for herself, but for all the others who hadn't been heard. Behind them, Detective Chen watched them leave, already planning her next moves. Tomorrow, she would start contacting Morrison's previous victims. The wall of silence that protected bad officers was about to come crumbling down. 3 days after Maya's assault, the police department's conference room was filled with tension. 5 young women sat around the large table, each with their own story about Officer Morrison. Detective Chen watched as they shared their experiences, one by one, their voices growing stronger together. Jasmine Martinez, a 19-year-old college student, spoke first. He stopped me last year, said I matched the description of a shoplifter. When I filed a complaint, Lieutenant Garcia said there wasn't enough evidence. Same thing happened to me, said Ashley Williams, wiping tears from her eyes. They said it was my word against his. No one even checked for security cameras. Maya listened to each story, her heart heavy but her resolve growing stronger. These women had faced Morrison alone, but now they were united. Her father stood at the back of the room, his face dark with anger as he learned how his department had failed these young women. Outside the conference room, news was spreading through the police station. Some officers whispered in corners, while others openly defended Morrison. Lieutenant Garcia had been suspended pending investigation of his handling of the previous complaints. My own supervisor buried these reports. Captain Thompson said to Chief Roberts, slamming the files on the chief's desk later that afternoon, "How many others are there? How many complaints have we ignored?" Chief Roberts looked uncomfortable. "David, you know how it works, without solid evidence." "We had evidence," Thompson cut in. "Security cameras, witness statements, hospital reports. Garcia had ignored them all, and you let him." Just then, Detective Chen knocked and entered the office. "Sir, we finished reviewing Morrison's body camera logs. He turned off his camera 43 times during traffic stops in the past year. All young women, all minorities." The chief's face paled. This was no longer just about one incident. This was about systemic failure. Meanwhile, in the station's break room, the divide among officers grew deeper. Officer Sarah Martinez, one of the few female officers in the precinct, stood up against her colleagues' defenses of Morrison. "How many times did we hear rumors?" she challenged them. "How many times did we look the other way? We're supposed to protect people, not cover up for predators with badges." Some officers left the room, uncomfortable with her words. Others stayed, beginning to question their own silence over the years. Back in the conference room, Maya and the other women worked with Detective Chen to build their case. They created a timeline, marking each incident, each ignored complaint, each failure of the system. "What happens if he still gets away with it?" Ashley asked, her voice shaking. "What if they still don't believe us?" Maya reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "They'd have to believe us now. We have evidence, we have each other, and we have good officers on our side." Captain Thompson watched his daughter with pride. In the midst of her own trauma, she had become a leader, bringing these women together, giving them courage to fight back. That evening, as the sun set over the police station, more changes were already in motion. Chief Roberts, under pressure from the mounting evidence, ordered a complete review of all harassment complaints from the past 5 years. Lieutenant Garcia's cases were being reopened. Officers who had remained silent were coming forward with information. "It's like dominoes falling," Detective Chen told Captain Thompson as they reviewed more case files. "Morrison's case is exposing problems throughout the entire department." Thompson nodded, looking through the window at Maya and the other women, still working together, supporting each other. "Maybe that's what we needed. Sometimes it takes one case to break open the dam." His phone buzzed with a text from his wife. "How's our girl doing?" He looked at Maya again, watching as she helped Ashley organize her statement, her face determined and strong. "She's changing things," he typed back. "She's changing everything." As night fell over the city, the lights in the conference room stayed on. 6 women, once victims who had been ignored by the system, were becoming advocates for change. Their voices, once silenced, were now being heard throughout the department, the city, and soon, the entire state. The system that had protected bad officers for so long was beginning to crack, and through those cracks, the light of truth was finally shining through. Officer James Morrison sat in the Internal Affairs interview room, his usual confidence crumbling under the weight of evidence before him. Detective Chen had arranged the files in neat stacks, 6 victim statements, security camera footage, body camera logs, and hospital reports. His lawyer, typically smooth-talking, looked increasingly worried. "Would you like to revise your statement about the night of October 15th? Detective Chen asked, her voice cool and professional. She played the security camera footage on the wall-mounted screen, showing Morrison following Maya down Maple Street. Morrison shifted in his chair. "It was a routine stop and frisk. I had reasonable suspicion." "Reasonable suspicion." Captain Thompson's voice cut through the room as he entered. Morrison's face went pale. He hadn't known the captain would be there. "Tell me, Officer Morrison, what was your reasonable suspicion for stopping my 17-year-old daughter?" The room fell silent. Morrison's lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he wasn't listening. He was staring at Captain Thompson, finally understanding the depth of trouble he was in. "Captain, I didn't know she was your—" "That's exactly the point," Thompson interrupted. "You didn't know who she was, just like you didn't know who any of your other victims were. You thought they were powerless. You thought nobody would believe them." Detective Chen spread out photographs from the hospital examinations, documenting the bruises Morrison had left on his victims. 6 women, Officer Morrison, 6 women in 3 years. And these are just the ones we know about. Outside the interview room, Maya sat with the other victims, watching through the one-way glass. They could see Morrison's shoulders slump as Detective Chen presented more evidence. His usual excuses about standard procedure and public safety sounded hollow now. "Look at him," Jasmine whispered. "He's not so tough when he's the one being questioned." Ashley wiped tears from her eyes. "I never thought I'd see this day. I never thought anyone would believe us." In the interview room, Morrison's lawyer tried to regain control. "My client maintains that all his actions were within department guidelines." "Guidelines?" Detective Chen opened another file. "Like turning off your body camera 43 times during traffic stops, all young women, all minorities. Was that within guidelines?" Morrison's face had lost its color entirely. In a hallway, officers who had once supported him walked past without making eye contact. The thin blue line that had protected him for so long was disappearing. "I want to make a deal," Morrison's lawyer said quickly. "No deals," Captain Thompson replied firmly. "We have enough evidence for criminal charges: sexual assault, civil rights violations, abuse of power. The district attorney is ready to prosecute." Morrison finally looked up, meeting Captain Thompson's eyes. "You're really going to do this? Turn against one of your own?" "You stopped being one of our own the moment you betrayed that badge," Thompson answered. "Every time you hurt those women, every time you abused your power, you betrayed everything that badge stands for." Detective Chen slid a paper across the table. "Your resignation. Sign it now, or we add resisting termination to the charges." Morrison's hand shook as he picked up the pen. In the observation room, Maya and the other women held hands, watching as he signed away his career. "The criminal charges will be filed tomorrow," Detective Chen informed him. "I suggest you get your affairs in order." As Morrison was led out of the station, officers turned their backs to him. The same men and women who had once protected him with their silence now showed their disgust openly. His badge, gun, and uniform were collected at the front desk. Maya watched him leave from the window of her father's office. "Doesn't feel real," she said softly. "After everything he did, it's finally over." Captain Thompson put his arm around her shoulders. "It's not over, baby girl. This is just the beginning. Morrison's case exposed problems we need to fix. Real changes are coming to this department." Outside, reporters were gathering, having heard about Morrison's resignation. The story would be in tomorrow's papers. Not just about one bad officer, but about a system that had protected him, and the brave women who finally brought him down. The sun was setting over the police station, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Morrison's empty patrol car sat in its usual spot, soon to be reassigned. On its hood, a bird had landed, free and unafraid, just like the women he could never hurt again. The county courthouse buzzed with tension on a cold Monday morning. Maya sat in the district attorney's office with the 5 other women, all dressed formally for their grand jury testimony. District Attorney Rachel Martinez spread their files across her desk, reviewing each case one final time. "Remember," Dame Martinez said, looking at each woman in turn, "just tell the truth. Your stories are powerful enough on their own." Maya nodded, smoothing her dark blue blazer, the same one she wore to debate competitions. But this wasn't a debate. This was real life, and their testimony today would determine if James Morrison faced criminal charges. In the hallway outside, Captain Thompson paced nervously. As a police officer, he testified before grand juries dozens of times. But never like this, never waiting while his own daughter faced 23 strangers who would decide if her case moved forward. "The security footage alone should be enough," Detective Chen said, trying to calm him. "But their testimony, all 6 of them together, that's what will make this case impossible to ignore." Inside the grand jury room, the air felt heavy. Maya was the first to testify. She walked to the center of the room, facing the jury members. Their faces showed different emotions, concern, anger, sympathy. Please state your name and age, the prosecutor said. Maya Thompson, I'm 17 years old. Her voice was clear and strong, just like in debate club. She told her story exactly as it happened, not leaving out a single detail. One by one, the other women testified. Jasmine Martinez described her traffic stop that turned into harassment. Ashley Williams shared how Morrison had cornered her in a parking lot. Each story built upon the last, showing a clear pattern of abuse. Outside the grand jury room, more officers began arriving at the courthouse, not to support Morrison, but to support the victims. Officer Sarah Martinez brought coffee for everyone. Even Chief Roberts came, though he looked uncomfortable being there. The department is watching this case closely, he told Captain Thompson. Changes are already happening. New policies for body cameras, better oversight for civilian complaints. Thompson nodded but said nothing. Policies were good, but right now, all he cared about was justice for his daughter and the other victims. Hours passed. Detective Chen presented the physical evidence, security footage, hospital reports, body camera logs. She explained how Lieutenant Garcia had buried previous complaints, showing the system that had protected Morrison. Finally, it was Morrison's turn to testify. He entered the grand jury room looking smaller than before, his lawyer whispering last-minute advice in his ear. But the grand jury had already seen too much evidence, heard too many consistent stories. Late in the afternoon, D.A. Martinez emerged from the grand jury room with a slight smile. They've returned a true bill. Multiple counts, sexual assault, civil rights violations, abuse of power under color of law. We're filing charges immediately. The hallway erupted in quiet celebration. The women hugged each other, tears flowing freely. Maya found herself wrapped in her father's arms, feeling like she could finally breathe properly for the first time in weeks. What happens next? Ashley asked, wiping her eyes. D.A. Martinez gathered them all together. Now we prepare for trial. It won't be easy. Defense attorneys will try to discredit you, question your stories. But we have evidence they can't explain away, and we have your truth. As they left the courthouse, reporters waited outside. Cameras flashed and questions flew at them from all directions. Maya stepped forward, surprising everyone. We're not hiding anymore, she said into the microphones. What happened to us was wrong, and we're here to make sure it never happens to anyone else. The other women joined her, standing together in front of the cameras. They weren't just victims anymore. They were advocates for change, voices for those who couldn't speak up. Captain Thompson watched proudly as his daughter handled the press with grace and strength. She was no longer the frightened girl from that night on Maple Street. She had helped transform a personal tragedy into a movement for justice. As the sun set behind the courthouse, Maya's words echoed across the evening news. The badge is meant to protect people, not harm them. Today, we took a step toward making that true for everyone. The grand jury had spoken. Now the real fight for justice would begin. 1 month after the grand jury's decision, Captain Thompson stood in front of the entire police department. The usually noisy briefing room was silent as he unveiled the new reforms that would change how they operated. The Morrison case showed us where we failed, he said, his voice firm. Today, we start fixing those failures. Every officer will wear a body camera that cannot be turned off during interactions with the public. Any attempt to disable it will result in immediate suspension. Officers shifted in their seats. Some looked uncomfortable, others nodded in agreement. In the back of the room, Detective Chen watched their reactions, taking mental notes of who seemed resistant to change. Second, Thompson continued, we're creating a new civilian oversight committee. Maya Thompson and Ashley Williams will serve as youth advisors. Their experience will help us understand how to better serve and protect our community. At a desk nearby, Maya and Ashley sat with notebooks open, already working on ideas. They had turned their pain into purpose, becoming voices for change in a system that had once silenced them. But that's not all. Chief Roberts stepped forward, surprising everyone. Captain Thompson will head our new Professional Standards Division. Every complaint will be investigated thoroughly. No more buried reports, no more looking the other way. In the weeks that followed, changes swept through the department like a cleansing wind. New training programs began, focusing on proper conduct and cultural sensitivity. Officer Sarah Martinez led workshops on gender-based harassment and abuse of power. The old guard wasn't happy. Lieutenant Garcia, now suspended, watched from home as his way of doing things crumbled. Some officers resigned rather than adapt to the new standards. But for every officer who left, 2 new recruits stepped up, eager to be part of the change. Maya's story had spread beyond their city. Other police departments called, wanting to learn about their reforms. News crews came to film their new training programs. Maya and Ashley spoke at police academies, sharing their experiences with future officers. Remember, Maya would tell them, the badge you wear is a symbol of protection, not power. The moment you forget that is the moment you stop deserving to wear it. One afternoon, Captain Thompson found Maya in his office, reviewing civilian complaints with Detective Chen. The wall behind them was covered with flow charts showing their new reporting system. Every complaint now had a clear path for investigation, with multiple checks and balances. "How's it going?" he asked, though he could see the answer in their determined faces. 3 complaints this week, Maya answered. All investigated within 24 hours. Body camera footage reviewed, witnesses interviewed. The system works when we make it work. Detective Chen nodded, adding, "Officers are thinking twice before acting now. They know someone's watching. They know there are consequences." Outside, the community was noticing the changes too. More women came forward to report harassment, knowing they would be taken seriously. Trust was slowly rebuilding between police and citizens. The department installed new security cameras around the city, not to watch citizens, but to watch their own officers. Every patrol car had GPS tracking. Every officer interaction was logged and reviewed. "It's not about catching bad officers," Captain Thompson explained to his team. "It's about preventing good officers from making bad choices. It's about remembering why we took this job in the first place." In the break room, Officer Sarah Martinez posted weekly updates about their progress. Complaint resolution times had dropped from months to days. Officer misconduct cases were down 60%. The wall of silence that had protected bad officers was being replaced by a culture of accountability. Maya's debate team even got involved, helping to write new policies in clear, simple language that everyone could understand. Their rights and responsibilities poster now hung in every precinct, a constant reminder of the department's commitment to change. As the sun set on another busy day of reform, Captain Thompson watched Maya leading a community meeting in the station's conference room. Young people from all over the city had come to share their experiences and ideas. "This is what healing looks like," he thought, seeing hope replace fear in their eyes. "This is what change looks like." The Morrison case had broken their trust in the system, but from those broken pieces, they were building something stronger, something better. A police department that truly served and protected everyone, regardless of who they were or where they came from. The badge still carried weight, but now it was the weight of responsibility, not power, just as it should have been all along. 6 months after Morrison's arrest, the courthouse was packed for his sentencing hearing. Maya sat in the front row with her father and the other 5 women who had testified against Morrison. They held hands as Judge Sandra Rodriguez prepared to deliver the sentence. Morrison stood at the defendant's table, no longer wearing his police uniform, but instead an orange jumpsuit. The jury had found him guilty on all counts 2 weeks earlier. Now, he faced the consequences of his actions. "Before I deliver the sentence," Judge Rodriguez said, "would any of the victims like to make a final statement?" Maya stood up slowly. She had prepared for this moment, practicing her words countless times. But now, looking at Morrison directly, she spoke from her heart instead. "What you did wasn't just an attack on us," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It was an attack on everything that badge stands for. But you failed. Instead of breaking us, you made us stronger. Instead of silencing us, you gave us a voice." Morrison stared at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Behind Maya, dozens of police officers filled the courtroom, including Chief Roberts and Detective Chen. They weren't there to support Morrison. They were there to support his victims. Judge Rodriguez's sentence was firm: 15 years in prison, no possibility of early parole. As Morrison was led away in handcuffs, Maya felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It was really over. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around the group. But this time, they weren't just asking about Morrison. They wanted to know about the changes happening in the police department. Our new oversight program is being adopted by departments across the state, Captain Thompson explained proudly. Every week, we get calls from other cities wanting to learn from our reforms. Ashley stepped forward to share the latest statistics. Complaints against officers were down 70%. Response times to emergency calls had improved. Community trust was growing stronger every day. Later that evening, Maya walked through the police station, now so different from 6 months ago. New faces filled the halls, young officers who had been attracted to the department's commitment to change. The walls displayed posters about accountability and community service. In the break room, she found Officer Sarah Martinez training a group of new recruits. Remember, Martinez was saying, "Your body camera isn't just for evidence, it's your protection too. It shows the truth, and the truth protects good officers." Maya smiled, remembering how that security camera footage had changed everything. She continued to her father's office, where he was meeting with Detective Chen and Chief Roberts. The governor called. Chief Roberts announced as she entered. "They want to use our reforms as a model for the whole state. Maya, they'd like you to speak at the state capitol next month." Captain Thompson looked at his daughter with pride. She had grown so much from that terrified girl on Maple Street. Now she was a leader, a voice for change, someone who had turned tragedy into triumph. "There's something else," Detective Chen added. 3 more women came forward this morning, victims of other officers who were afraid to speak up before. They said your story gave them courage. Maya nodded, feeling both sad and hopeful. There was still so much work to do, but at least now there was a path forward. That night, as Maya drove home with her father, they passed the spot on Maple Street where everything had started. The street looked different now. New security cameras, better lighting, regular community patrols. "Do you ever regret it?" Captain Thompson asked quietly, coming forward, facing everything that followed. Maya thought for a moment, watching the streetlights pass by. "No," she said finally. "It was hard and scary, and sometimes it felt impossible. But look at what came from it. Look at how many people we're helping now." As they pulled into their driveway, Maya saw Ashley waiting on their porch. They had a meeting tomorrow with new police recruits, sharing their story, teaching them about power and responsibility. The badge still carried weight, but now it was different. Now it was the weight of trust being rebuilt, of power being used to protect instead of harm, of a system slowly learning to be better. Maya stepped out of the car, ready for whatever came next. She had learned that one voice could start a change, but many voices together could create a revolution, and this revolution was just beginning.